This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. Hello friends! In today's video, I am going to be drawing only male portraits. Crazy, I know, who am I? This is not going to be a tutorial, we don't do that here, but I will be sharing some tips and advice on things that I like to keep in mind while I draw male characters. I'll be using this beautiful handmade mixed media sketchbook that Chanel, aka Bitter Melon Bindery, sent to me, as well as some watercolors and colored pencils. Further details about the supplies will be listed in the description. So to start, I use my favorite red erasable colored pencil for the sketch. I personally hate using graphite pencils because I find that they smudge too much and ultimately create muddy colors when they mix with watercolors and other media. But something to note about this pencil is that the eraser on the end is not that great, so my preferred eraser is actually a kneadable one, which you'll probably see me use at some point during the sketching process. I prefer using a kneadable eraser because that way I don't have to deal with the annoying eraser shavings. And I also gotta say, I actually really hate sketching while filming. So after this first frustrated attempt on this portrait, I ended up turning the camera off, erasing it completely, and starting all over again from the beginning. And I did both of the portrait sketches off camera. Then, when I'm satisfied with the sketch, I like to go over it with the Faber-Castell Polychromos colored pencil, not only to reinforce and darken the lines, but these particular colored pencils are oil-based, so they will actually resist water, and thus they will stay in place when I begin using watercolors on top of it. But before we continue, I just quickly wanted to talk about today's sponsor, Squarespace. Previously, I used to have my online shop on a different platform, and it was extremely limiting in the fact that it could only serve that one function. The great thing about making the switch to Squarespace is that now I can have both an online shop and a gallery. This makes it much more streamlined for me to be able to professionally showcase my work to future clients and collaborators, while also allowing my audience to support my work all in one space. So if you're interested in launching your own website, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/imawonder for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So for today's sketchbook session, I wanted to practice drawing male portraits, and so I picked out a couple of photos from Pinterest to use to study from. I'll have the photos I used as reference in the description. I think I have probably mentioned this before, but one of my art goals that I set pretty much every year is to work in my sketchbooks more often. The reason for that is because I think it is a great space to allow yourself to explore things out of your comfort zone, experiment with art mediums, subject matters, and style. If you saw my first studio vlog last week, you would have seen that Chanel was so kind to send me not one, but two of her handmade sketchbooks. And while I already have way too many unfinished sketchbooks already, I couldn't resist trying one out for you guys. I decided to try out the mixed media sketchbook. She sent me a mixed media and a watercolor sketchbook. But I decided to go with the mixed media one first because I have been really wanting to push myself to make looser work, or at least make looser experiments in my sketchbooks. Can you imagine? I originally went into this sketchbook session with the intent to create loose, quick portraits. I really cannot seem to break out of getting carried away and going just into full render and polish mode. I think this is probably the reason why it takes me so long to finish any sketchbooks, because I have this bad habit of spending way too long on each and everything that I made in them. I think it's just the kind of inner perfectionism in me, just unable to let things be a little bit messy. In the end, though, I'm not mad at it because I actually had so much fun with these portraits, and I'm really happy with how they ended up turning out, even though it ended up taking a lot longer and was not really what the intention I had was going into it. But right off the bat, before I began, I knew that since this is a mixed media sketchbook, the paper is much thinner, meaning that it cannot handle too much wet media, otherwise it'll start to warp and buckle. With that in mind, I knew I wanted to primarily use colored pencils, but I figured that laying down some quick washes of color would help give the colored pencil a base color to work from and help enrich the colors, since I wouldn't have to worry about the white of the paper peeking through. Minus, of course, the areas I intentionally left untouched for the brightest highlights. So for those of you who are familiar with my work, you'll know that I primarily draw and paint women and female characters. My personal affinities for fashion and beauty trends just generally lends itself to femme portraits and figures, and I'm pretty well practiced with drawing them at this point, and they come quite naturally to me since that's what I mostly do. I have definitely seen a fair number of people express that they also find women easier to draw, and so while I am not quite as experienced drawing men, I thought that I could share some tips with you that I take into account when I draw male characters, so that maybe it could help you in your journey to drawing more male characters, if that is what you want to do. Also, just as a disclaimer, and this goes for any subject matter, really not just people, but there is not one right way or one way to interpret something. People, men, women, and everyone in between come in a wide array of appearances and are not limited to any set rules. So the tips and advice that I'm going to discuss are just my own personal preferences and aesthetics when it comes to male characters and portraits. So with that out of the way, one of the key things that I like to keep in mind when drawing a more masculine person is to have more angular features. I think this makes a big difference, especially when it comes to the jawline. During the sketching portion, I try to use more straight lines than curved ones. When drawing women, I think that we generally go for much curved, softer lines to kind of have the appearance of something a little bit more delicate. I also noticed after working on these two portraits was that the brow bone and eyebrows were set a little bit lower or closer to the eyes. Also, having the eyebrows a bit straighter and thicker also helps reinforce the angular features, and if you can, make them a little bit less cleaned up than maybe you would for a female portrait, but this isn't necessarily a huge difference for me, since I also really love thick, bold eyebrows on really any gender, but that is something that I think helps, especially when I was working on the portrait on the top. I tried to make his eyebrows like slightly more feathered out, I guess, or have more stray eyebrow hairs like sticking out from the top, just to try and like roughen it up a little bit. Then another thing I like to do to differentiate my femme and masculine portraits is that when I draw women, I really like to have like very dramatic eyelashes. I am all about, those classic beauty trends. And so for these male portraits, I omitted eyelashes completely for the bottom portrait. And then when it came to the portrait on the top, I did like a very, very minimal eyelash on the top lash line, and then did no eyelashes on the bottom. When I draw women, I typically stylize the necks to be fairly thin and slender, but with male portraits, you generally want the necks to be a little bit thicker to proportionally match their broader shoulders. Also, going back to my stylization choices when drawing femme characters is that not only do I go for dramatic eyelashes, but I also like to put emphasis on the cheeks, nose, and lips and make them quite warm and rosy to emulate makeup as well. So while some people do naturally tend to look a little bit more flushed in the cheeks, nose, and lips, I keep those color shifts much more subtle when drawing masculine portraits and not quite as saturated as I would with femme portraits. But yeah, again, I would like to reiterate that these are very generalized pieces of advice, and I acknowledge that people of any gender are free to present and express themselves in whatever way feels genuine and authentic to them. This is just my personal piece of advice for my usual approach when drawing male portraits or male characters. I often get people asking me how they can improve their drawing and painting skills. And while yes, you can spend hours and hours watching tutorials and videos, but truly the only surefire way to improve is to actually put in the time and practice with intention. And the reason why I say intention is because I think that there is a difference between drawing the same thing with the same approach over and over than there is to practicing with a variety of different methods to propel your development as an artist. I know that there seems to be mixed opinions in the art community about using photo references, but I think that studying from life is incredibly crucial to improving your art skills. If you create art only from your imagination, you're not absorbing any new information. And without new information, how are you able to learn and expand your knowledge to be translated into your art? For example, if I were to draw a palm tree, I have like a vague idea how to draw a palm tree based off of seeing them on when I'm traveling or seeing photographs of them or seeing them in movies and TV shows. But if you were to tell me to draw a realistic palm tree right now, I'm sure it wouldn't look that great. However, if I were to pull up a photograph or several photographs and do various studies from them, then maybe I would be able to eventually be able to draw a fairly accurate palm tree down the line because I have practiced drawing them accurately from an actual representational version of it. Of course, this is mainly applicable to representational artists, but I'm sure even many abstract artists spent some time learning and understanding the fundamentals. And I think that it's pretty commonly said that to understand how to break the rules, you have to first understand the rules. So yeah, that's my little random tangent/rant about using photo references to study and practice from. That being said, I also think that using good references is also important to keep in mind when doing studies. When it comes to portraits, if you want to learn how to place shadows and highlights on a face, be sure to pick photos that have clear shadows and differentiating values. It will be much more insightful for you in understanding the form and the different planes of the face if you can clearly see all the different shadows and highlights in the photo. And again, variety is definitely key. Studying from photos of various different people and different lighting situations so that you're able to build up a visual library to be able to use in future illustrations. Which brings me to another reason why I decided to do these male portrait studies. For those of you who have been following me for a little while, you might have noticed that whenever I draw dudes, it's almost always fan art of fictional characters. And This is something I recently realized and that I have essentially been doing all of my life. When I was in high school, that was when I really began to create a lot of art. And what really got me started was it was my way of expressing my love for various fictional characters. So basically, I used to draw a lot of anime boys. But as I got older, naturally, I developed more interests outside of anime and manga, and thus that was reflected in my artwork. I am a huge lover of fashion and makeup, and while of course those two things are not limited to just women, I find that I just prefer to illustrate women to express those interests. Some things never change though, and to this day I still love creating fan art. And during this past year, while dealing with the pandemic, I have been consuming a lot more media than I have in quite a long time. So I've been watching and reading a lot of new content, but I've also been revisiting lots of old favorites. And so now there is just this humongous list of characters that I really want to draw in my own style. That being said, in order to bring these characters to life in my own way and, want to do them justice, I figured that it was time to go back to the basics and just be better practiced with drawing more masculine portraits. And yeah, I think that even though I have been drawing and creating portraits for a very long time, I think that it's very important to always go back to the fundamentals, no matter what stage you are in your art journey. And then, so hopefully what I'm able to learn from these photo studies, I can hopefully be able to translate to these fictional characters that I do fan art for that is, something of my own style. Since a lot of the fan art that I want to create are of animated or illustrated characters, and I don't want to be just mimicking or emulating the styles that these characters come from, but rather somewhere in between realism and stylization. Obviously, the state of the pandemic and how our lives are going to look is still filled with a lot of uncertainty, but I do hope that we will make it out on the other side at some point and be able to go to events again. And something that I've been missing a lot lately, especially now that I've been consuming so much media, is anime/comic conventions and art markets. For those of you who don't know, prior to the pandemic, I used to table at a lot of these sorts of events pretty frequently, and while they're definitely pretty exhausting, they are so much fun. There's just something so unique about the atmosphere and energy at conventions. There's this just sense of camaraderie and community that we're just all collectively humongous nerds about various TV shows and comics and movies. So hopefully during this time, I can kind of build up more like new merchandise and products for hopefully when we get to go to conventions again. So be sure to follow me on Instagram if you haven't already, and that way you can stay up to date and see all of my various artworks and fan art that don't get made into YouTube videos, because obviously I still create artwork that is outside of my YouTube channel, and so especially with fan art, I try to keep that a little bit more limited on my YouTube channel since I know that it's not something that everybody wants to see. And so follow me over there. I'm definitely going to be making more fan art in the coming months. Anyways, we're just about near the end of today's video, and so I hope that you enjoyed seeing this process and listening to me ramble, and I hope that at least the male drawing tips were helpful, maybe? Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!